talk to fill the emptiness. You scroll to escape the quiet. You turn on music, podcasts, anything, to avoid what waits in the silence. I know, I do it too. But there's something Rumi knew 800 years ago that we've forgotten. He said, "Silence is the language of God. All else is poor translation." What if everything you've been searching for, every answer you've been chasing, every truth you've been desperate to hear, is waiting in the one place you refuse to go? The silence. We live in a world that's terrified of quiet. We've built entire lives around avoiding it. Wake up, check your phone, walk, put in earbuds, drive, turn on the radio, wait in line, scroll, scroll, scroll. We've turned silence into the enemy. Because here's what we don't say out loud. Silence makes us uncomfortable. It makes us feel our loneliness, our regrets, our questions that have no answers. In the noise, we can pretend. In the noise, we can stay busy. In the noise, we can avoid the things that ache inside us. But Rumi knew something we're only beginning to remember. That noise isn't just sound. Noise is every thought you repeat to yourself that isn't true. Every worry about tomorrow that steals today. Every judgment, every need to be right. Every story you tell yourself about who you should be. We're drowning in our own translations, trying to put into words what can only be felt, trying to explain what can only be known. And all the while, God is speaking, but in a language we've forgotten how to hear. You know that feeling when you finally stop, when the house is quiet, when the phone is down, when there's nothing left to distract you. And suddenly, everything you've been running from catches up. The grief you haven't processed, the fear you haven't named, the loneliness you've been medicating with noise. It's overwhelming. So you reach for something, anything, to make it stop. But what if that's exactly where you're supposed to be? What if the discomfort of silence is the doorway? Rumi wrote, "The wound is where the light enters you." And silence is the wound. It's where all your carefully constructed stories fall apart, where your ego can't perform, where your mind can't control. In silence, you meet yourself. Not the version you present to the world, but the raw, unfiltered truth of who you are. And that's terrifying, because in silence, you can't lie. You can't pretend. You can't translate the truth into something more comfortable. You just are. And maybe, just maybe, that's exactly what you've been afraid of. Not the silence itself, but what the silence reveals. That you're not who you thought you were. That you're not in control. That you're small and lost and so beautifully, perfectly human. And in that humility, in that breaking open, something speaks. Rumi called it the language of God. But what does God's language sound like? It doesn't sound like anything. It's the space between your thoughts, the pause between your heartbeats, the stillness underneath all the noise. It's that moment when you're watching the sun rise, and suddenly you're not separate from it anymore. You're not observing beauty, you are the beauty. It's when you're holding someone you love, and for just a second, there's no past, no future, no story. Just presence, just this, just now. It's the knowing that comes without thinking, the peace that arrives without earning, the love that exists without conditions. God's language isn't in the prayers you speak, it's in the silence after the prayer. Not in the scripture you read, but in the pause when the words land in your heart. Not in the questions you ask, but in the surrender when you stop asking. Because here's what Rumi understood. Words are tools for separation. The moment you name something, you create distance from it. You say, love, and suddenly you're defining it. debating it, trying to capture it. But the actual experience of love, that lives in wordless knowing, in the silence where you and the beloved are no longer two separate things. Every translation, every attempt to put the infinite into finite words is a reduction, a beautiful reduction sometimes, a necessary reduction even, but still a loss, like trying to describe the ocean to someone who's never seen water. Your words might be true, but they'll never be true. The only way to know the ocean is to dive in. The only way to know God is to stop talking and listen. Not with your ears, with your entire being. So how do you learn this language? Not by doing more, by doing less, by giving yourself permission to sit in the discomfort, to feel what you've been avoiding, to stop filling every moment with noise. Start small. 5 minutes. Just 5 minutes of silence. No phone, no music, no distractions. Sit with yourself the way you'd sit with a heartbroken friend, with compassion, with patience, without trying to fix anything. And here's what will happen. Your mind will scream. It will throw every thought, every worry, every to-do list at you. Because your mind is terrified of silence. In silence, it loses its power. Don't fight it. Just notice. Watch your thoughts like clouds passing through the sky. You're not the clouds, you're the sky. And slowly, gradually, the noise will settle. And underneath it, you'll hear something. Not a voice, exactly. Not words, but a presence, a knowing, a love that was there all along, waiting for you to stop talking long enough to feel it. This is prayer, not the kind where you ask for things, but the kind where you remember who you are. This is communion, not with a distant deity, but with the divine that lives inside you, around you, as you. This is coming home. Rumi spent his life trying to translate the untranslatable. He wrote thousands of poems, trying to capture in words what he experienced in silence. And every poem is beautiful, every verse is true. But even he knew they were all poor translations. Fingers pointing at the moon, but not the moon itself. The real teaching wasn't in what he wrote, it was in the silence between the words, in the white space on the page, in the pause after you read a line that cracks you open. That's where God speaks. Not in the noise of certainty, but in the quiet of wonder. Not in the answers you think you need, but in the questions you're finally brave enough to stop asking. Because here's the paradox. The moment you stop seeking, you find. The moment you stop trying to understand, you know. The moment you surrender to the silence, you hear everything you've ever needed to hear. Not as words, not as explanations, but as presence, as love, as the deep, unshakable knowing that you are held, that you've always been held, that you're not separate from God, you're an expression of God, a word spoken into existence. And when you're ready, when you've talked enough, when you've translated enough, you return to the source, to the silence where all words are born and where they all return. So today, can you give yourself 5 minutes? 5 minutes of silence, not to achieve anything, not to become more spiritual or enlightened or healed, just to listen, to stop translating long enough to hear the original language, to stop running long enough to feel what's been chasing you, your own soul, trying to get your attention. The noise will always be there. The world will always offer you a million ways to avoid the quiet. But you were made for more than distraction. You were made for depth, for presence, for the kind of knowing that can't be Googled or explained or captured in words. You were made to speak the language of God. And that language is silence. So stop talking, stop seeking, stop translating. and listen. Everything you need is already speaking.